I want to, before we do the other awardees, I'm going to bring up our candidates, then do another award, and try to respect the time of our candidates and give them time to speak to the ministers about their program and policies, and then honor, and then candidate, then honor. Senator Booker is en route. Yesterday, another candidate joined the field, and he is here, Congressman Tim Ryan, who is, this is his first full day of campaign, and he called me and said, I have to come by and speak at NAN. We've known him, and we're going to hear from him, and of course, Senator Gillibrand. And if nobody else announces by 3, them two, I guess. Senator Amy Klobuchar, we have worked with. She has been a fighter on many of the issues of civil liberties and civil rights, gender rights, LGBTQ rights, a unabashed progressive with a pragmatic agenda. And she is a candidate for President of the United States. Let us hear from Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend. Thank you. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you for your wisdom and your witness, your work, and the way you never give up. I'm inspired by you, and I also wanted to thank Dr. Jones' daughters and congratulate Reverend Lacey. As you all know, I announced my candidacy for President of the United States in the middle of a blizzard, if anyone saw it, in a permanent snow globe. And one of the more interesting things after that was that the President of the United States then tweeted out and called me Snow Woman. So I responded this way. I said, I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard. He never really answered. So I spoke that day, when I announced, I spoke that day about how that river and about how all rivers connects us. And no one knows this better than those of you who have spent your life fighting for civil rights and racial justice. You know those rivers. Slaves were put on steamboats to be sold at ports along the Mississippi River. Generations later, when Hurricane Katrina hit the city of New Orleans, where the Mississippi ends, the African American community was hit the hardest. Most recently, after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, miles away from this same river, protests of outrage broke out. This river connects us to this pain through this pain. But redemption, as I said that day, also runs through that river. A river over which slaves successfully escaped by crossing the Mississippi. And yes, New Orleans was rebuilt and is now being led by its first African-American female mayor, LaToya Cantrell. That is change. And in Ferguson this very week, Michael Brown's mother was on the ballot for city council. She didn't win this time, but I know it is not the last we will hear from her. Those are our rivers. Those rivers connect us, but sadly for us right now, this president sees these rivers as divide. And I announced my candidacy next to that river because I think it is time in our politics to cross that river of our great divides and to walk that sturdy bridge of our democracy to get to a higher plane in our politics. Because racism still persists in this country. We hear it echoed in our schoolyards and on our neighborhood sidewalks. We hear it from white nationalist riots and on the presidential podium. We see it reflected in our laws and in our institutions. And we must change it. Because no, Mr. President, there are not two sides to this issue. There is one side, and that is the side of justice. So, What do we do? Well, the first thing is what the Reverend was talking about, and that is that our number one priority must be economic justice, because we cannot have racial justice without economic justice. And that means schools that work for kids in every neighborhood in this country. You can't have schools like they have in Baltimore, where literally the heat didn't go on this last winter. It means good child care and preschool. It means making sure when our kids graduate that they're not loaded down with debt. It means understanding that there are many paths to success in this country. It also means making sure that every worker gets a fair wage, and that is why I'm a strong supporter of a federal $15 minimum wage. Right now, Black and Latino households have only about 1/10 of the median net worth of white households. 1/10. We have to close the wealth gap, prepare families in case of emergency, and set up our workers for a successful retirement. That means overhauling our country's housing policy and making sure that we end housing discrimination. All things that all of you have been fighting for since before I was born. Today, the scales of justice are off kilter, and I was proud to be a co-sponsor of the First Step Act. But we will not have justice until we pass the Second Step Act. 90% of those incarcerated right now are in our state and local prisons. And that is why we must create those incentives so the states do exactly what the federal government did with the First Step Act, which is let people who are nonviolent offenders, who are of no risk to our society, come home to their families. That's what we must do. When it comes to voting rights, it is outrageous that, as one court said, that states like North Carolina discriminated with, and these are their words, a conservative court, surgical precision. We must reauthorize the Voting Rights Act and pass my bill to register every single kid when they turn 18. That is how we get justice, and that is how we have a strong democracy. So we've talked today some about this path to justice. I was thinking back, Al, to that election night, to that party in New York, when everyone thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be the first woman president of the United States. Well, I was at home in Minnesota going around and speaking. And when I got home, when things were going bad, I had forgotten that my daughter was actually at Hillary's party. She was in college. And she sent me this text, and that was when I remembered she was there. And it said, "Mom, what should we do now?" And I sent her this text back, and I said, "You know what, honey? It's not going well. You've got to get on the subway. It's still running. You're going to my friends. Get on that subway with your roommate, and remember you have class tomorrow." That's what I wrote. And she wrote back to me, "Mom, I mean our country." And that is the question that we've been answering every single day since Donald Trump won that election. What should we do now? But if we answer that question by just putting our blankets over our head every morning when we see a new tweet, we don't see change, we don't see action. And we have a tradition here right in this room, in the tradition of Reverend Sharpton, in the tradition of Reverend Jackson, in the tradition of Reverend Jones. We march and we say we are not just resisting, we are insisting on a better way forward. The next day after Donald Trump was sworn into office, millions of people peacefully marched across this country. Women, men, Black Lives Matter, people all over this country marched together. The day after that, 6,000 women signed up to run for office. And day 10, after that mean-spirited Muslim order, the anti-refugee order was put into place, people spontaneously showed up at airports across this country on a Saturday. Who does that? They did that because they were marching in your tradition. Then you move forward to my favorite march, Day 100, the March for Science. And my favorite sign, what do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. That was the March for Science, the March for Racial Justice to do something about climate change. Then you go forward into the summer when they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and every single Democrat in the United States Senate turned and voted and were joined by 3 Republicans, and we defeated their effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. We did that, and you did that. Then you go to the fall. You go to the fall where there are these legislative races in New Jersey and in Virginia. And my favorite one was a guy in New Jersey who the day of the Women's March said, I hope they'll be home in time to make dinner. Guess what happened that fall? He got defeated by a woman. Or in that incredible victory against racism and the victory for dignity and justice, Doug Jones won the Senate seat in the state of Alabama. That happened. That is the arc of justice that we were on. And then you go to the spring where those students marched from Parkland. And they didn't just give us their voices or their protests, they voted. And that is why just this last month we passed universal background checks for this country, and we are moving with the Violence Against Women Act that closes the boyfriend loophole. That is what's happening right now in this country. So the march continues, and they say the arc of justice is long. Well, there are some really good welders in this room that have shortened it. So we ask you to keep marching with us. That is how we won in 2018, and that is how we will win in 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Give a hand, Senator Amy Klobuchar. Several years ago, my friend, who was then governor of the state of New York, David Paterson, he and Congressman Greg Meeks and I are around the same age. We grew up together in public life, and he called me and said that he wanted to send someone to speak at the Saturday rally. As you know, for 28 years, every Saturday, we gather at the House of Justice and do a live on-air rally. And I said, well, okay. He said, can you make room for them? I said, yes. He said, all right, I'm sending you Congresswoman Gillibrand. I said, who is Congresswoman Gillibrand? He said, she serves in the northern part of the state. And I said, and why is she speaking? He said, you'll know that by Saturday. That Thursday, he announced that he had selected her to fill the seat of Hillary Clinton in the U.S. Senate. She came that Saturday, and I've had everyone from Mrs. Clinton to Barack Obama, to you name them, come on Saturday morning. But she did something that no one has ever did. She spoke for about 15 minutes, and then she said, now I'll take questions. I said, no, you don't know my crowd. You don't want to do that. She said, no, and she stood there on live radio, hundreds of people there, thousands listening, and took every question. Ever since she's been in the Senate, she has been accessible to us. She never misses an event, an occasion, a birthday, but even more important, on policy. She calls us and checks in on issues. And she called me when she first thought about running. She called me and said she was going to go away with her family and talk about it. And she called me and said she was going to call Reverend Richardson to pray about it. And I don't know why she want to pray with me. I'm not going to take it personal. But I do want her to know I noticed that she says you're going to pray with Richardson. I don't know what kind of prayer y'all got, but he decided you was running, I guess. So I want to bring on this junior senator of New York, who's not a junior to anybody that knows her, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
Reverend, you're the best. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let's make sure this works. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Thank you, Reverend, for your friendship, your leadership, your vision, your ability to gather us together, to be of one mind and one heart. Thank you to Reverend Richardson for his leadership, his drive, his vision and tenacity. I feel blessed to be here at the Minister's Luncheon. 2 weeks ago, I officially launched my presidential campaign just a few blocks away in front of Trump International Hotel with a message that I believe in so strongly. When America joins together to reject hate and division, hope rises, fear loses, and brave wins. That rally was very much like this gathering. The power of these events is not in the politicians standing at the podium. It's in the brave people who show up every day to fight for our values, not just at rallies and marches, but every single day. People like Reverend Sharpton, who has never stopped fighting for social justice, and my dear friend Jennifer Jones Austin, who for more than 2 decades has never stopped fighting for underserved children and families because their fight is her fight. And of course, her late father, who we are honoring here today, Reverend William Augustus Jones, Jr., a man of God who sought to redeem the soul of America while spending his life advocating for poor families. That is brave. Bravery is the people in this room and the millions of Americans who have tirelessly spoke out against this administration's cruelty toward women, Muslims, the LGBTQ community, and families suffering and struggling, waiting at our border. The truth is, President Trump is tearing the moral fabric of this country apart. He demonizes the vulnerable. He punches down. He puts his name in bold on every building, and he does this because he wants us to believe that he is strong. He is not. Our president is a coward. Now that is not what we deserve. Americans like you are making a choice to resist the backward pull of this administration and pushing us towards a better future. We need a president who is worthy of your bravery. That is why I am running for president of the United States. We need to fight for an America where power truly belongs to the people, where our leaders care about everyone in this country and lead not from weakness of ego, but from strength of their character. I know we can be that America, but it means by starting at the root of our problems, which is greed. Right now, special interests are displacing the voices of the people of this country. Find me a so-called unsolvable problem, and I will point you to the greed and corruption standing in its way. Polluter profits take precedence over drinking water. Predatory lenders get special access to the White House and are allowed to take even more advantage of the vulnerable. The NRA stops popular, common sense gun reform while stray bullets kill children in our communities. And we have Lucy McBath here to stand up for our communities. Dark, unaccountable money is at the heart of this outrageous inaction. We need to crack open our government, flip the switch, let the light flood in. That's exactly what I did when I first came to Washington and challenged Congress by making my meetings, finances, earmark requests public. I called it the Sunlight Report. I was the first member of Congress to put all these things on my website, and it was not popular among my colleagues. They said the bar was too high for transparency. I rejected that notion, and I reject it now. The American people deserve to know that their elected leaders are working for them. It's why I wrote and passed the Stock Act in 2012 to make it illegal for members of Congress to line their own pockets and profit from insider information. Public servants should never enrich themselves in the offices that they hold. Perhaps our president needs a reminder. I will keep leading on transparency within my own office and campaign. It's why I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. It's why I have no federal lobbyist money and no individual super PAC. And it's why I was the first presidential candidate to release my 2018 taxes. I've put 12 years of tax returns online, going back to my very first year in public service. And as president, I will fight for publicly funded elections. I believe it's the closest thing we have to a silver bullet. I would change the way Washington works overnight. Our president should govern based on the principle that our democracy only works when our elected leaders hear directly from the people they represent, and that your voice is as loud as everyone else's. Only then, once we address the greed in Washington, can we finally start to make progress on the problems we face. But here's what I've also learned in the last several years. To take on the issues that matter most, you have to have a leader who is willing to be brave. A leader who is brave just like you. And I have learned that bravery means standing up to the powerful, summoning the courage to confront it head on. And that's why when I first ran for Congress in a 2-to-1 Republican district, nobody thought I could win. Except, of course, for my mother. And that tells you a lot about my mother. People told me that district, it has more cows than Democrats. You just can't win it. But I took those long odds and I won. And the next election, I won again. That time with a 24-point margin. And why did I win? Because I've never forgotten who I serve. I stood up to greed, and I voted against the bank bailout twice. I stood up to corruption by making insider trading by members of Congress illegal. I stood up to bigotry and fought to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it's why I am proud to stand up to Donald Trump and vote against his nominees more than anyone else in the U.S. Senate. So I will go toe-to-toe to do the right thing with anyone, whether it's powerful institutions, the president, or even my own party. We have big fights in front of us that we cannot afford to lose. And we can't possibly win if we aren't willing to speak out and speak up for what's right, regardless of who might be mad. I will not let anything get in our way of making sure that health care becomes a right in this country and not a privilege. We have to ensure that every kid gets a good public school education no matter what block they grow up on. We have to pass a national paid leave plan, and we must reach full employment in this country. At the same time, we have to dismantle the institutional racism that pervades our society and holds back millions of families. It's in our healthcare system, our education system, our economy and criminal justice systems. It's in the growing crisis of black women's maternal mortality. It's in the sentencing disparities that keep black men in prison for years while white-collar criminals go home on bail. It's in the wealth gap between black and white communities that only widens from generation to generation. These challenges call for solutions both targeted and broad, like higher standards for maternal care, a national commitment to full employment and ending underemployment, postal banking so that more communities have access to capital, ending cash bail, legalizing marijuana. We must protect and expand our voting rights, get the dark money out of politics, and combat attacks on our democracy. From racist voter suppression to gerrymandering and foreign tampering in our elections. We know Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia today, but for disenfranchisement of voters. What happened there was outrageous. Every eligible voter should be automatically registered when they turn 18. We should have early voting in every state, a national holiday for Election Day, and every vote must be counted in our elections every single time. And before I close, I know that Reverend Sharpton has been asking every 2020 candidate about the issue of reparations. This is a conversation that is long overdue. So I want to let you know where I stand. I firmly support Congresswoman Jackson Lee's bill to create a commission to study reparations. As president, I would advocate to Congress to pass that bill, and I would sign that commission into law. This is the first step of acknowledging, as a country, that hundreds of years of slavery and institutional racism have caused mass inequity and harm to black people and has held black communities back for generations from achieving their full potential. And we must not only study the problem. Right. It's not just the issues that I've already mentioned that we have to fix. We need specific answers to each of these problems. We have to also deal with affordable housing and redlining. We need environmental justice. We need to take on the racist city planning from the likes of Robert Moses. I pledge to take on all of these issues directly as president. None of these fights and equally big goals are going to be easy. Nothing that is worth fighting for ever is. But I've never backed down from a fight, and I certainly will not stop now. Our faith tells us to care for the least among us. Our faith tells us to feed and clothe the poor. Our faith tells us to help the stranger, the sick, and the incarcerated. All of us here today are called to be the light of the world, not to be hid under a lamp, but to be on a hill, so that the world can see that light. We are called to be that light of the world, to take on the dark forces, to do what is right when it is hard, to put on our armor of God and go to battle for what is right. This is what we are called to do in this moment. And we will all look back on this day, and we will be asked, what did you do when you were asked? You will personally be asked, what did you do when hate reigned? What did you do when fear reigned? What battle did you take on, and who were you willing to stand up to? You will be asked, you will be called, and you must respond. That is our job the faithful to fight this battle. As a candidate for President of the United States, I will not back down. I will not give in. When hope rises, fear loses, and brave wins.
My. Go ahead and preach that thing.
Preach. Just a little preaching.